Hey folks, the September kiss is upon us and it's a goodie. We are making this gorgeous exotic bloom cushion. This cushion is made up of 4 blocks that can be made in either the 5x5, 6x6, 7x7 and the 8x8 size hoop. In this video tutorial I will show you the stitch out of block 1 and the construction of the cushion. We recommend you follow our photograph written instructions in conjunction with this video tutorial. If you would like to receive a 30% discount on this cushion, please head over to our September KISS Facebook group. The link for that group will be in the description below. And also remember to post all your wonderful projects on that group to go into the running to win the competition. If you found this video tutorial helpful, please like and subscribe. Okay folks, begin by hooping up cutaway stabilizer in the hoop and load the design onto your machine. Use applique scissors for trimming the batting and fabric. Place batting 1 on top of the hoop and stitch the batting down. Remove the hoop from your machine and trim the batting about 1 to 2 mm from the stitching. Stitch the place and line for the background fabric. Place fabric A right side up on top of the hoop, covering the place and line, and stitch down. Remove the hoop from your machine and trim the fabric about 1 to 2 mm from the stitching, and leave the excess fabric in the seams. Embroider the quilting. Stitch the place and line for the first border strip. Place 1 piece of fabric B on top of the hoop wrong side up with a 1/4 inch crossing over the place and line and the excess fabric pointing towards the right side of the hoop. Stitch down. Fold the fabric over so the right side is facing up. Hold taut and stitch down. Trim, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Repeat the flip and fold process with the second border strip using the second fabric B. Trim, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Repeat the applique process with the first part of the scalloped edge using fabric C. Stitch down. Trim, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Stitch the placement line for the second scalloped edge piece. Place the second fabric seed wrong side up, crossing the placement line by 1/4 inch, with excess fabric directly over the top section of the border, and stitch down. Trim the join back to 6 mm 1/4 inch, and fold the fabric back towards the bottom right hand side of the hoop. Hold taut and stitch down. Trim, leave the fabric in the seams. Embroider the satin stitch along the scalloped edge. Stitch the placement line for the inner corner triangle. Place fabric C on top of the hoop, wrong side up, with a 1/4 inch crossing over the placement line, and the excess fabric towards the top left corner of the hoop, and stitch down. Fold the fabric over so the right side is facing up. Hold taut and stitch down. Trim, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Repeat the applique process with the inner corner flower using fabric D. Stitch down, trim, leaving the excess fabric in the seams. Embroider the background petals on the flower. Embroider the satin stitch around the flower. Repeat the applique process with the inner corner flower using fabric E. And stitch down. Trim, leave the excess fabric in the seams. Embroider the detail on the flower center. Embroider the satin stitch around the flower center. Embroider the ovals that surround the flower. Embroider the ovals at either end. And then embroider the rest. Use this diagram to work out which section of embroidery is next in the sequence. The number corresponds to the step number and the files in the instructions. Repeat the applique process with the outer corner flower using fabric F. Embroider the background petals on the flower. Repeat the applique process with the flower center using a piece of fabric large enough to cover the place and line. Embroider the satin stitch around the flower. Embroider the satin stitch around the flower center. Embroider the circle inside the flower center. Nicely done. You have now completed the stitch out of block 1. Remove your work from the hoop and trim the seams to about 1/2 inch. Hold aside until all your blocks are made. Alright folks, we will now construct our cushion on our regular sewing machine. First lay your completed blocks on a flat surface and decide on your layout. Start off by joining the blocks in rows. Place the first 2 blocks right sides together and pin along one edge, lining up the border stitching the best you can. Take your time with this process. Sew a 1/2 inch seam, sewing just inside the border lines already on the blocks. Open out the stitch seams and iron them flat. Repeat the above process to join the 2 remaining blocks together. Next, join the horizontal rows to each other by placing the first 2 rows right sides together. Pin along one edge, lining up the border stitching and satin stitch points the best you can. Take your time with this process. Now take the pin rows over to your machine and start by tack stitching the joins of the blocks and the satin stitch points. Then sew a 1/2 inch seam, sewing just inside the border lines already on the blocks, so the stitching will not be seen on the right side later. Open out the stitch seams and iron them flat. Attaching the flat piping. The flat piping is optional. Measure the length across the blocks, allowing for an inch overlapping each side of the blocks, and cut your fabric. Cut two 1 1/4 inch strips, fabric H, for the flat piping on the ends. Press the strips of flat fabric for the piping in half widthways, ensuring the raw edges are sitting exactly on top of each other. Lay a flat piping strip right side up on top of the bottom edge of the join blocks, with the folded edge pointing towards the center of the background fabric. Pin or quilt clip together and repeat for the other long edge of your cushion. And stitch into place with a 1/4 inch 6mm seam. The edges of the flat piping will overlap the ends. Now trim. Repeat process for the remaining short ends, fabric I. Alright, let's prepare and add borders. Measure the length across the blocks. For the borders, decide how wide you would like them. We made ours 3 inches, 8 centimeters wide. Now cut 2 strips of border fabric, fabric J, the length you just measured. Then cut 2 pieces of batting, batting 2, to match. Next, we are going to secure the batting to the border fabric by lightly spraying temporary adhesive to the batting, and then laying our fabric right side up on the batting. Place the cushion on top of the border fabric with the attached batting. Right sides together. Pin or clip together. Now stitch together with a 1/2 inch seam. Pinning and stitching on the wrong side of the cushion means you can make sure you are stitching inside the borderline on the front of the cushion. This will ensure this line of stitching will not show on the front. Trim back the batting from the seam allowance. Fold over and iron the side border down neatly. Top stitch the border for a neat flat finish. Repeat for the opposite border. Now trim the borders so they are in line with the sides of the blocks. Now measure one of the side edges without a border, including the new border width in your measurement. Cut 2 strips of border fabric K, the length you just measured. Then cut 2 pieces of batting 3 to match. Repeat the temporary adhesive spray that we did for the first 2 borders. Now place the cushion on top of the border fabric with the attached batting, right sides together. Pin and stitch a 1/2 inch seam from the edge. Trim back the batting from the seam allowance. Fold over and iron the side border down neatly. Top stitch the border for a neat flat finish. Repeat for the opposite side of the cushion front and trim the borders to make them all even. Alright, let's prepare the backing. Starting with fabric L backing piece, fold one of the long edges over 1/2 inch, wrong sides together. Press with the iron. Then fold over a second time, another 1/2 inch, and press. stitch along the folded edge to hold it in place. Repeat the same process with the fabric end piece. Adding the backing to the cushion. Have your cushion front right side facing up. Take the fabric L backing piece and place it wrong side up on top of your cushion front. And have the folded edge of fabric L meeting up with the seam in the middle of the blocks. Pin in place. Next, we need to measure out and mark the placement for fabric M. Measure 2.5 inches in from the folded edge of fabric L. Place fabric M on top of the opposite side of the cushion wrong side up, with the folded edge of fabric M in line with the mark you made on fabric L. The two backing pieces should form an envelope with the hem sides overlapping each other. Pin in place. Turn the whole cushion over to the other side, so that the wrong sides of the blocks are facing upwards. The backing pieces should not fall off as you have pinned it, and stitch the backing and the cushion front together with a 1/2 inch seam all the way around the cushion. Adding the front lining now. Place fabric and front lining right side up on your work surface. Then place the cushion wrong side of the blocks facing up, on top of fabric end. Pin together leaving a gap, 4 to 9 inches, 10 centimeters to 23 centimeters for turning through later. Stitch together from the back of the borders with a 1/2 inch seam. Leave a gap for turning through later. Trim the seams of the cushion to a 1/4 inch. This will remove the excess backing and lining fabric. Leave 1/2 inch at the opening. Also clip the corners. Turn the cushion out through the opening. Your cushion will still be wrong sides out. Use a chopstick or that pink thing to help push out the corners. Give it a press with the iron. Now hand stitch or glue the opening closed. Any method you would like. Now turn your cushion out for the second time through the envelope created from the two backing pieces of fabric. Now use a chopstick or that pink thing to help push out the corners. Give it a press. Next, before we top stitch the borders, straighten up the envelope backing and make sure it is lying flat. We use pins across the pillow to keep it flat. Top stitch the outer edges of the cushion borders. Make sure your top thread is the same color as your border fabric, and the bobbin thread is the same color as the backing fabric. Now remove the pins from the back and add some sort of closure to the back of the cushion if you feel it necessary. You can use any method you would like. We decided to add cam snaps to the back of our cushion. To do this, simply measure along the seam, decide how many cam snaps you need, and distribute them equally. Now insert a cushion insert or stuff with stuffing. Good job. I truly do hope you enjoyed making your very own exotic bloom cushion. I bet they are looking amazing. That's all from me this month. Head over to our website, sweep.com, for more amazing machine embroidery designs and sewing essentials. See you next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe.